Hi, welcome to the Bible Standard, where you are guaranteed in-depth Bible study and analysis. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and drop a comment in the comments area to have your say, and we'll do our best to reply.
The letter of James we're going to be looking at over the next few days in our daily readings, and what a remarkable epistle it is. I'm not going to be talking a lot about the epistle itself, but events that led up to the writing of this epistle, commencing about 400 years before. So it's interesting to look at this epistle as the epistle of the brother, half-brother of the Lord Jesus Christ, as a much loved and respected brother in the early ecclesia, tremendous wisdom that he had, his great perspicacity, his insight into human nature and into the events and circumstances of the ecclesia in the early days, and the answers that were required, particularly if we look at him with his council at the Jerusalem conference, that council that took into account all the viewpoints, settled everything down, so the traditional Jews and the Hellenists and the Gentiles could all live and work together in harmony in the ecclesia, with mutual submission, with consideration for each other and their individual circumstances and backgrounds. He was very wise. And he wrote this particular epistle while the ecclesias were still young. Probably not long after the Jerusalem conference, we expect. Many of the ecclesias were still being established and meeting in the synagogues. Chapter 2 and verse 2, where we read, if there comes into your assembly a man with a gold ring, the word assembly is synagogue. So obviously it's addressed largely towards the early times of the ecclesia and the Jewish believers. And Jewish believers were, of course, the traditional Jews and the Hellenist Jews who had adopted Greek customs. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the background to this epistle, because this epistle was written in the common language of the day. So the Jews of the 12 tribes scattered abroad, he addresses in the first verse, the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Greeting, the Diaspora. But weren't there 10 lost tribes? Weren't there 10 lost tribes? Don't we hear about that? Well, this is telling us that they weren't lost anymore, that they had actually come out and started to identify themselves. The time of the fall of the northern kingdom was 722 BC. The northern kingdom were taken into captivity. They were generally taken into the areas of Mesopotamia, around the river Euphrates, and across towards the area of the Medes. And they could well have assimilated into their surroundings and their Gentile friends. Well, most of the Jews that went there, of course, weren't able to separate themselves entirely. The Jews really can't do that. Those few who remained in the land, in the northern kingdom, of course, intermarried with the Gentiles and became the Samaritans, still very close to the Jews. But the northern captives could have lost their identity entirely, except for a vision that was seen by a man about 400 years before this letter was written. James wrote to the 12 tribes in this common language called the Koine dialectos, Koine common dialect, and that actually was the common Greek language, which we refer to in history now as New Testament Greek, Common Greek, Septuagint Greek. Septuagint written in this same language. And James wrote the epistle in that common language. How did that come about? Well, the New Testament language had been common for about 300 years and went on and to still be the common language right throughout the Roman Empire, even after the Roman Empire collapsed into the Byzantine times, till about 600 AD. The same common language was understood and read right throughout the empire. Yes, there were common dialects, of course, and there was Latin, not the easiest language. Back in Deuteronomy 28, I think it talks about a language which you won't be able to understand. Well, can anybody understand Latin? Not really, but common Greek was common. And James could write to everybody, all the Jewish people scattered throughout the world, in that common language. Jews and Gentiles could read this epistle. It was the world's first common language since the Tower of Babel, in fact. And it was common throughout the world, and that made our New Testament possible. It made our New Testament possible that it could spread around the world. It made it possible for epistles to be written in that common language and everybody to be able to read and understand. So the gospel that James wrote, others could write more easily to everybody, was because of this vision. A man had a vision, possibly a vision from God, possibly from God. Before ever he left Macedonia, this man had the vision. Before he set out to conquer the world, this man had the vision. About 20 years old, he ascends the throne of Macedonia after his father Philip was assassinated. And the first thing he did, as rulers did in those days, as he'd been advised by his teacher Aristotle, was to kill everybody in the court who might be able to take the throne from him. Anybody who was involved in that assassination, he eliminates them straight away. He'd been tutored since he was about 13 years of age by Aristotle. And Aristotle taught him statecraft, taught him how to be ruthless at times when necessary, taught him philosophy, but also taught him the sciences and taught him how to be gentle sometimes and to be caring when that was appropriate. He was brought up in the area of Thessalonica, and we were there only a few weeks ago, so I suppose the mind is focused upon this man. There's an enormous statue of this man riding his horse right on the shores, the forefront of the harbour in Thessalonica. And there is Alexander the Great on top of his beautiful, glorious horse, Bucephalus. And the statue's on a plinth about 15 foot high, and the statue itself is about 20 feet high. And it's a place, Thessalonica, which was very close to where Alexander was born, where they still talk about Alexander the Great every day. You go into the cruise port there, and it's called the cruise port of Alexander the Great. Well, the fellow died 2,500 years ago. Why is he so important? Well, he's certainly important to those people, but he's also important to us. So he's on this great horse, 13 years of age. A man comes to the King Philip, that's of course Alexander's father, with this magnificent horse, a big war horse. Called Bucephalus, the name actually means ox head. You wouldn't think that was a very kind name to give a horse, but he had a very, very big head. He had a beautiful black shiny coat, and he had a lightning flash of white down just in the middle of his forehead. He was a beautiful looking horse, well built. Ox head, because the head was big, but also he had the body of a bull, but the legs of a horse. So he was a real mighty war horse machine. And the man had him for sale at a huge price. And he offered him to the king and the nobles around, but nobody wanted to buy him because nobody could ride him. He's more than 10 years old and nobody had yet ridden him. And Alexander observed him. He's being paraded around for sale. Alexander knew there was a problem. This horse was frightened of his own shadow. He would buck and rear at his big shadow. And Alexander thought, very wise Alexander, I think I can tame this horse. So he offered to He said, if I can tame him, Dad, will you buy the horse? Father said, might as well have a go. So he turned the horse around so that he faced the sun, and the shadow was behind him, and he couldn't be frightened of his shadow. And he mounted him straight away. And before long, he had tamed that magnificent horse. And that horse stayed with him for 20 more years. He was actually the same age as Alexander. And Alexander was terribly grieved when he died, but he stayed with him through many, many battles, and was a real heart-to-heart relationship with the horse. And when the horse died, Alexander was very, very grieved. He was killed in battle when he was 30 years old, that horse. So he was a mighty, mighty horse. Maybe James was thinking of him when he said if any man among you seem to be religious and bridleth not his tongue, verse 26 of chapter 1. If he bridles not his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is vain. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. I think Alexander's horse was still famous for a long, long time. Whether that's exactly what James was thinking of, but it's certainly a marvellous story. A great horse can be tamed by using the right manner and understanding the fears and troubles of the horse. I suppose it applies to us too, doesn't it? If we can put aside our fears and our troubles, we can control the tongue, control the body, can have a good influence upon others. So this horse went with Alexander. When Alexander's father, Philip, saw what had happened and how the horse had been tamed by the wisdom of Alexander, he said to Alexander, my son, the Macedonian kingdom is not enough for you. You deserve to rule the world. And of course, so he went on to do. My son, he said, you will rule the world. And of course, his father brought in Aristotle to teach him in philosophy and wisdom and politics and how to rule the world. And he was a very sensitive person, Alexander. Great warrior, but very sensitive. He took with him on his journeys people like philosophers and scientists and botanists. Think a little bit about Captain Cook. So he certainly was an amazing man, and one that was much loved by his people. So this great statue in Thessalonica on the shore there, erected in 1973, and it's the horse up just on its two hind hoofs. This huge statue. It's an amazing statue to see. And as we said, in the port called the Port of Alexander the Great, so Alexander continues to have a huge impact on the world. And he had a huge impact on the world in James's day and in the New Testament times because of the Greek language that he brought to all of the then known world and made the gospel available to everybody in a common language. So at 20 years of age, Alexander has a Nebuchadnezzar-type vision, a vision that he couldn't forget. He couldn't get it out of his mind, what he had seen. Same as Nebuchadnezzar. He remembered that vision. It was graphic. And soon after 20 years of age, he begins his conquests. He crosses the Hellespont. He fights the Battle of Granicus, then he fights that decisive Battle of Issus in 333 BC, from which we get significant dates in the book of Daniel, where he defeats the Persian king Darius III in person. They come together in person in battle. The winged leopard of Daniel chapter 7, of course, is the Greek Empire. The goat with a notable horn between in his forehead smashes into the ram in Daniel chapter 8, and that's the overcoming of the Persian Empire. And then after he comes across Turkey as it is today, he turns south down the coast and comes to Tyre. And he besieges Tyre for 7 months, And eventually, of course, Tyre is overthrown. Then he goes down the further coast to Gaza and takes Gaza. And then he turns inland and towards the hills and sets his face on Jerusalem. His sights are on taking Jerusalem. At that time comes another vision. Not that vision that he'd seen earlier, another vision to another man. Not to Alexander, this time to the high priest in Jerusalem, Simeon the just. He's praying. What will we do? Alexander's on his way. What will we do? God in heaven. How can we defend this city against this mighty foe, Alexander, this great and ruthless and fierce conqueror? What can we do? And Josephus tells us, we're going on Josephus, it's not in the scripture, we know, but it's historically recorded, and it may well be so. There's certainly good reason to think it may well be so. Josephus says that God tells the high priest in a vision, don't try and defend Jerusalem this time. Don't try and defend the city. Go out and graciously and formally offer him the keys to the city of Jerusalem. Give him the keys. As it were, surrender to him. Let him do what he will. And show him the prophecies of Daniel about him. So Alexander's massed his troops, and they're marching up the hill towards Jerusalem, and they're not far from the city. He's led by his cavalry because he's a cavalry champion. At 18 years of age, he'd actually fought on Bucephalus and won a great victory in Greece before he came over and crossed the Hellespont as a great cavalry captain. And so he led his cavalry up to their positions. And as they're coming towards Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, from the angle that they would have approached coming up from Gaza, the magnificent city on the hill, and a wonderful aspect as they're looking there, and the gates come open. The gates come open, and out comes the high priest, dressed in all his beautiful garments. There's a large group of priests with him, all dressed in brilliant white. Then come the elders of the city, and they come out quite a little way outside of Jerusalem, and they meet Alexander and his captains, and the Syrian captains are with him too. They're all going to try and take the city of Jerusalem. And they come out heading to meet Alexander. And that's astonishing enough. That's astonishing enough that they're just coming out in that form and that brilliance of their clothing. It was quite astonishing to Alexander. But Alexander's looked to him for a response to this, and suddenly what he does, he dismounts from Bucephalus down to the ground, steps forward, and bows his head on the ground in front of Simeon the just, the high priest. And his general's never seen him like this before, of course. How can this great and mighty conqueror bow before someone he's never seen before? But Alexander, he's down on his knees and he looks up at them and he says, but I have seen him before. I have seen him before. I saw this man in a vision, dressed exactly like that, before I left Macedonia. And he told me to make haste and come and conquer the world. I saw his very face in a vision before I left Macedonia. Now this is, I could read for you, please, a paragraph or two here from Josephus. This is what he says. Alexander, when he saw the multitude at a distance in white garments, while the priest stood clothed in fine linen, the high priest in purple and scarlet clothing, with his mitre on his head, having the golden plate whereon the name of God was engraved, he approached by himself and adored that name, and first saluted the high priest. The Jews also did altogether, with one voice, salute Alexander and encompass him about. Whereupon the kings of Syria and the rest were surprised at what Alexander had done and supposed him disordered in his mind. Well, However, Parmenio, who was very close to Alexander, alone went up to him and asked him how it came to pass that when all others adored him, he should adore the high priest of the Jews. To whom he replied, I did not adore him, but that God who has honoured him with his high priesthood. For I saw this very person in a dream, in this very habit, when I was in Macedonia, who, when I was considering with myself how I might obtain the dominion of Asia, exhorted me to make no delay, but boldly to pass over the sea thither, for that he would conduct my army and give me the dominion over the Persians. Of course, the Persians had long been enemies because the Persians had actually gone into Macedonia some years before and had controlled part of Macedonia before. So they were an enemy of the Greeks. So he says, whence it is that having seen no other in that habit, and now seeing this person in it, and remembering that vision and exhortation which I had in my dream, I believe that I bring this army under the divine conduct, and shall therewith conquer Darius, which he did, and destroy the power of the Persians, and that all things will succeed according to what is in my own mind. So Aristotle had taught him. He taught him statecraft, he taught him principles of honour and justice and sensitivity, the arts and sciences. He could be terrifying to his enemies, but just and kind to those who were gracious to him. So Alexander went in to Jerusalem. He joined in worship, he offered sacrifices, and he said he wanted a statue of himself put in the temple. The priest said, not on. That's not what we do. We don't have graven images. And so what Alexander demurred, they came to an agreement that in his honour, every boy child born in the next 12 months would be called Alexander. And still to this day, Alexander is a common Jewish name. Variations like Xander, sometimes Sender, Sandy for short. We know that Alexander went on to Egypt and founded Alexandria, which became a centre of science and learning. And so he was taking his tuition from Aristotle and spreading it further around the world. And many Jews went to Alexandria in Egypt and became a great centre of learning, sciences. Hellenistic customs began and started to spread right around the world. And within 100 years, the Septuagint was written in Alexandria. So we're starting to see the influence of Alexander in what was going to happen, which would ultimately result in the Word of God spreading to the Gentile world, through the Jews, but out to the Gentile world, through the Hellenistic Jews who adopted many Greek customs into their worship. Now, Alexandria wasn't the only city in Egypt, wasn't the only city that he founded and called Alexandria. Apparently there were about 70 cities around the world, all called Alexandria, so he was a bit fond of his name. But the Jews, as we said, still revere Alexander the Great, and Alexander is a Jewish name. Cities around the world. We know that Alexander went right across through Afghanistan and almost to India. We've heard of the city Kandahar in Afghanistan, the centre of the Taliban, Alexander, Kandahar. So the name in various forms spread right around the world. It was a worldwide empire. So this favourable relationship between the Jews and the Greeks now, Alexander left the Jews to more or less be themselves, to worship as they pleased and to conduct their own society. But it became quite natural for a Hellenistic culture to be embraced by the Jews in dispersion. And as with all the people of Israel, who had been scattered into dispersion from the northern kingdom for about 400 years, they'd stayed underground from 722 to around about 300. they'd more or less not lost their identity, but stayed very low in terms of a profile. Now they felt that they could come out. The Persians had been overcome. There was little persecution of the Jews now throughout the Greek Empire, and they could identify themselves again. And of course, they had many of the customs that they'd adopted, being living locally, almost underground, but they could come out and they could be Hellenistic Jews. And so, as we know, all the people of Israel, their identity might not always be obvious, but they can never really integrate. They are a separate people. They are God's witnesses. And so they came out. So James could write to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. And they received favourable treatment under the Seleucids until along came, about 150 years later, Antiochus Epiphanes, who we know was very, very anti-Semitic, very anti the Jews, and actually desecrated and polluted the temple and put a statue in the temple, statue of Zeus, and sacrificed a pig on the altar. But within 3 years, he had been driven out. The Maccabees took control. The beginning of the Feast of Hanukkah was at that time, the Jews celebrating the relighting of the lampstand, and the oil miraculously burning for 8 days when it should have only lasted 1 day. Began the miracle of the Feast of Hanukkah, which we still know is celebrated today, and sadly was celebrated last year in Sydney in very difficult circumstances. But Hanukkah continues as an evidence, as far as the Jews are concerned, that they know they must be the light of the world. Jesus was present at the Feast of Hanukkah and when he said, "I am the light of the world." So the Hellenistic influence has really continued on. And it's most significant that it led up to the ability of the writers of the New Testament to really spread the word in a common language throughout all of the known world. Many of the Jews took on the Hellenistic way of life, modified their customs, mixed with the Jewish traditions. So all over the Roman world, Jews of every tribe were identifiable. They were free to travel. They could settle anywhere, conduct their business and trade. This is what James talks about, as we'll read in the coming days in his epistle. Many would travel to Jerusalem at the time of the feasts, and there was a special synagogue for the Hellenist Jews. And it was called the synagogue of various places, including the synagogue of Cilicia, where the Apostle Paul, of course, grew up in Tarshish, in Cilicia. He wasn't actually a Hellenist, but he knew and understood all their customs. He was a Pharisee, but he could communicate with them very well and was just as afraid of the gospel coming out of that synagogue with people like Stephen as he was about the spreading of the gospel in other places as well, and stood there while they laid down their clothes at his feet. So all these people could come from countries far and wide. We see the list in Acts chapter 2. Thousands were baptised in Jerusalem and took their new faith back to their home countries and synagogues. And these are the readers of the Epistle of James. There were two great centres of learning and teaching and business, Alexandria in Egypt and Antioch in Syria. Apollos was from Alexandria in Egypt, and he was a man mighty in the scriptures, and he knew the baptism of John, which means that things spread around the world quite quickly in those days, from John the Baptist's teaching down into Egypt. And we know too about the 12 disciples, the 12 disciples of John the Baptist who were in Ephesus, so far away. Again, the Hellenist people had come to Ephesus, and they hadn't heard about the Holy Spirit gifts yet. Paul baptised them. And of course, Barnabas, he was sent to Antioch to teach the Grecians there it was a Grecian centre. So the two centres really were Alexandria in Egypt and Antioch in Syria, big centres of Hellenistic teaching. And so that all things were ready for this epistle to be written. The Jews of the Diaspora were always great businessmen, and often they were very, very wealthy people. And James addresses that in this epistle, and the great contrast between the rich and the poor was quite significant. Those who did well did extremely well. As an example, you may have heard of Philo of Alexandria. He was historically well known as a Jew of Alexandria. He was a member of one of the most wealthy families in the whole empire. He had a brother named Alexander, funnily enough. And that Alexander was the Elon Musk of his day. He was the wealthiest of his day. He was a tax collector. He was a customs agent involved in the trade and taking a slice off the top. He got involved in politics. He was a friend of Herod. He was a friend of the emperor, Claudius. And he paid for 9 gates of Herod's temple to be overlaid with thick plates of silver and gold. Very, very influential, a Hellenist Jew. And they involved themselves in trade as the great merchants of Europe and the Mediterranean. They spread right across the whole of the then known world. Goods were traded and moved by horses and wagons, as we would imagine, and by ships. But the horses and wagons, as we said, James chapter 3, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they may obey us and turn about their whole body, just like the tongue. But chapter 3, verse 3 and 4, he talks about the horses for trading and also the ships for trading, and relates them to the tongue. Verse 4, behold also the ships, which though they be so great and are driven by fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. That's the power of the tongue. But the analysis, or the analogy that he's making, is about the great ships which traded, and the Jews knew all about trade, and they used the ships for trade, and the great ships were the ships of Tarshish. They were the best built ships to handle not only the tremendous storms of the Mediterranean, but outside in the Atlantic Ocean as well. They could handle all of that weather. And they were huge and well-built ships. A very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth, that's okay until you meet a wind like Euroclydon, which the Apostle Paul met and blew him. Well, could have kept on blowing him right out through the Straits of Gibraltar if it had kept on going, and it landed on an island, Malta. So it's interesting. The ships of Tarshish have their origin among the Greeks. You go back to Genesis chapter 10, and I've loved looking at Genesis chapter 10 over the last few years. There's so much in Genesis 10 about the origins of nations and influences upon the world, going way, way back. And in Genesis 10, we read of the 7 sons of Japheth, Genesis 10 verse 2, and they are Gomer and Magog and Madai, that is the area of the Medes, and Javan, and Javan is the Greeks. If you remember that there's no J in many of the other languages, it's an I, instead of J as we have it. That's Javan, or Ionians came from Javan, Ionians. And the Greeks were always called Ionians in the ancient days. And Tubal, of course, the area of Turkey, and Meshech and Tiras, areas Tiras is around about Ukraine, Meshech a little bit further away, Moscow and across the Russian areas. So these all came from Japheth, including among them Javan, the Ionians, the Greeks. Now we read a little bit about, only read about the descendants of Gomer and of Javan. And Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath and Dagama, areas in sort of Central Europe and beyond. And then we read of the Greeks. Sons of Javan are Elisha, that's the islands near Italy, Sicily, Malta, Tarshish, which is Britain, Kittim, Cyprus, and other ports that came and were populated by people from Cyprus. Dodonim is the area of Rhodes, Rhodonim, Rhodes, lots of islands in that area there, the Greek islands, and they had many ships. And we read about them, that in verse 5, by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands. Now that tells us Tarshish is an island. We know it's Britain. Everyone after his tongue, after their families in their nation. So the Greeks are the people who populated Britain originally. They sailed to Britain. The ships of Tarshish sailed to Great Britain, and they were capable for centuries. They were masters of the seas. Their merchant navies carried all kinds of goods all over the world, right up until recent times. I remember the name Onassis, the great shipping magnate, and he controlled many, many ships. That's changed a little bit in recent times, but for centuries, the Greeks were the masters of the seas, and their merchant navies carried all kinds of goods. They knew how to build ships, take them through the Pillars of Hercules, as they were called in the early days. It is the gateway out to the from the Mediterranean out to the Atlantic Sea, where everybody thought if you went out too far, you'd drop over the edge. But the Greeks knew better, and they were there for a long, long time. I'm quite sure that Solomon knew when he built ships for Tarshish, but built them in the Red Sea area to sail to India, but those were the ships that went to England. The ships of Tarshish, the same design, the same structure, so that they could handle the heavy seas. And so the Greeks were colonising all of the Mediterranean and beyond, and building ports and settlements all around the Mediterranean. And Solomon had these ships of Tarshish. Jonah was trying to sail to Tarshish. Those sailors had been out there to England and back again. And they traded from Joppa, Israel. Can't imagine that there weren't Jewish people out there on the ports in Tarshish in those days handling the trade at the other end. And so Jews were scattered throughout the world. With the business went the Jews. Thessalonica, back to Thessalonica, where the centre of Alexander's home area was, in that northern area of Macedonia. Thessalonica was actually named after Alexander's half-sister, his sister, but from a different mother, married Cassander, who was one of Alexander's 4 generals, and she was the wife. She was the sister, became the wife of one of Cassander's generals, and the city was named Thessalonica after her. She was born on a day when Philip, her father, Alexander's father, had a victory in Thessaly, which is just south of northern Macedonia, in battle. And that's the day she was born. He said, name her Victory over Thessaly. Nike is victory, of course, Thessalonica. It was a large port back in the day. And that city was built by Cassander, became a very attractive place for the Jews to go because of their identity with all things Greek in those early days. So it was a big area serving all the areas to the north, right up into Scythia and Ashkenazi areas in Central Europe. That was a port that served all those areas. And when Paul came there was a very, very influential multitude of Jews there. Remember when he went to Philippi, there was no synagogue. He came down to Thessalonica and there was a big synagogue there. Lots of Jews. And not only lots of Jews, but lots of Hellenist Jews who had converted many Gentiles. And we read that in Acts 17, verse 3, that there were many devout Greeks that believed what Paul was teaching. Now, they are the Greek people. They are the Gentile Greeks. who were devout, who were proselytes, who'd come into the ecclesia there. But the unbelieving Jews, of course, set the whole city in an uproar. And again, they were very influential, and they moved on down to Berea and chased Paul from there as well. There's quite a history of the Jews in Thessalonica. Just to share with you, things that we've looked at because of having visited there. All through the centuries, the Jews have been involved in Thessalonica. It's a big centre for them. In 1492, Columbus sailed in one direction. Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. But at the same time, the Spanish king and queen began the Spanish Inquisition. And what was the purpose of the Spanish Inquisition? The Spanish Inquisition was to root out Jews who previously, in previous decades, they had told, unless you become Catholics, you've got to sell up all your goods, give the money to us, and leave the country. And many of them converted. They were called conversos. But they didn't really. They kept their Jewish faith and their Jewish customs, but they wanted to stay there because their businesses were there and so on and so on. The Spanish Inquisition was set up, approved by the Pope, to root out these people, to bring them to trial, and often to kill them or burn them at the stake or whatever, to persecute them. So what happened was those Jews in Spain, under the King and Queen of Spain, right across in that area, they're called the Sephardic Jews. Sephardic is actually the name for the Hebrew name for Spain, Sephard. So the Sephardic Jews, many of them left and ran for their lives and travelled right across the continent as far as they could go to Thessalonica, which is in the far east of Greece. You've almost crossed over into Asia. So they went there. They knew that there was a Jewish settlement there and they would be happy there. For the next 400 years, Jewish people were more than half of the population. More than half of the population of Thessalonica. Hundreds of thousands of them were there. They did well, they were well accepted, they were embraced. Everything went very, very well for them for a long time. And then a great fire happened in the area where the Jews mainly lived, down near the port, because they were the trading people. On the lower areas near the port, a huge fire in 1917. And 70,000 people were left homeless, and 2/3 of those people left homeless were Jews. 1917. What happened in 1917? The Balfour Declaration. Where were these homeless people going to go? The town was very slow in trying to do something to rebuild and provide homes for them. Many of them went to the Holy Land. Many of them went to Israel. But quite a lot stayed behind as well. And there's now a great monument to 50,000 Jews who were taken in 1943 by the Nazis and never seen again. It's quite a harrowing monument there, which in a bronze monument which depicts the suffering, the torment of the people who were taken away at that time. So the Jews are still well respected there, but there's only a few thousand of them left in Thessalonica. But many of James's readers, brothers and sisters, were very successful traders, merchants, business people. They wore gold rings, they wore fancy clothes, they had horses and wagons and ships and all the trappings. They would say, oh, let's go somewhere far away for a year. Maybe we'll start to Tarshish. Let's go for a year and buy and sell and get goods, get gain. But some were poor and sickly and in need of help and encouragement. And James says, don't forget each other. But live with each other as family. Know that all this trial and suffering you're going through will pass. The good times won't last, and the bad times won't be forever. Life's a vapour. But the key to it all, one message for everybody. This epistle is a general epistle, an epistle for everyone. And the beauty of it is it's an epistle for us today, because that language that was introduced 400 years before was God preparing the world for the gospel to go not only to the Jews, not only to the Hellenist Jews, but to all the world, the Gentiles too. Just a few points to conclude. The great message is patience. Patience, long-suffering, endurance, and staying the course, no matter what the circumstances. The trying of your faith, James 1 verse 3, worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. Continue on. Don't be deflected. Don't think too much about your business, what's happening in the next 12 months. Think about today and think about your brothers and sisters who need. And you come to chapter 5, and whilst the epistle has dealt with numerous little exhortations, he comes back to the patience turn again. James chapter 5 and verse 10, he says, "Take my brethren, the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience." Read your Old Testament. Read your Old Testament scriptures. There's huge lessons there. And particularly, look at the circumstances of the writers and the people of the time. Look at the people and take personal people lessons. Verse 11, "Behold, we count them happy which endure, who continue patiently." We've heard of the patience of Job. There's a man who had everything and lost it all. He had a gold ring. He had fancy clothes. He had all the trappings and lost it all. But he was patient. He endured, and he obtained the promise. And some beautiful words here in verses 7 and 8 of James chapter 5. "Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth," because he's patient, "waits for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it." You know, you sow the seed and nothing seems to be happening. Nothing seems to be happening. Then there's a shoot. Then hope springs, and up comes the plants for harvest. Till he receives the early and the latter rain. But God is consistent. He will continue to send the rains. Be patient. Establish your hearts, brothers and sisters, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Be patient. It will be soon. So, brothers and sisters, we look forward to reading this really exhortational epistle over the next few days. Much of its teaching echoing the words of the Lord, gleaned also from the Proverbs, the practical issues of life, the things that James heard at the dinner table when he was younger. Written in a time in history that everyone could read it, whatever their circumstances, wherever they are in the world, and know it was written for them, the 12 tribes scattered abroad, and all who would be with them. The Lord appeared to James soon after his resurrection, and everything fell into place. He knew his calling. He knew what he had to do. And quietly, but courageously, he has sent out this message to the world, and now especially to us. The Lord, his brother is risen indeed. Let's wait patiently, oh so patiently, together as one body in Christ.
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching, and remember to come back soon.